Motion be agreed to, and I give the call to the honourable member for Fremantle.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'm very happy to contribute to this debate brought by the member for Page about Australia's approach to trade. And Labor has always supported fair and free trade because where trade is fair and unobstructed, with proper consideration given to social and environmental impacts, all countries can benefit. How they benefit, and more precisely who benefits, are questions with less clear answers. Certainly there's evidence that while trade liberalisation delivers aggregate economic growth, it can exacerbate inequality. Without question, trade is complex, and it's not much good if our conversation about trade or the conversation in the press or wider community is reduced to a finger-painting version of the reality. The notice of motion lists the number of trade agreements settled under the former government. It cites the coverage of tariff-free access as a proportion of Australia's trade. Now, that's all good and fine, and of course Labor was supportive of the pursuit of those agreements, but it doesn't really go to the detail and quality of the Coalition's effort when it comes to their management of Australia's trading relationships as a whole. Needless to say, trade agreements are not worth much where their details are ignored and are otherwise unenforceable, and trade agreements are not worth much either where the absence of effective domestic trade facilitation means that Australian companies, especially small and medium enterprises, are not able to take advantage of the opportunities that they create. Not surprisingly, this motion doesn't acknowledge, for example, that the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement has been virtually useless in preventing the geo-economic coercion that we've experienced in recent years. It doesn't acknowledge that the PACER Plus agreement between Australia, New Zealand and a number of Pacific Island nations that was settled in a form that Papua New Guinea and Fiji, the two largest Pacific Island economies, refused to sign. That was unfortunate, but it was in keeping with the former government's mismanagement of our relationship with Pacific Island nations, and we've seen some of the consequences of that mismanagement. It doesn't acknowledge, Deputy Speaker, that the Morrison government was quite happy under the first version of the Trans-Pacific Partnership to see an extension of monopoly rights granted to American pharmaceutical companies in respect of biologic medicines that would likely have increased costs to the PBS by several $100 million each and every year. Deputy Speaker, trade agreements these days cover a much wider range of matters than just tariffs and market quotas. Indeed, they often involve concessions that are the very opposite of free trade, like the example that I've just given, extending monopoly rights to big pharmaceutical companies in the United States to the detriment of our bottom line. Under the previous government, such concessions also include the preparedness to do away with labour market testing for some categories of temporary foreign workers and the preparedness to do away with actual skills testing in critical areas like work in the electrical trades. The Coalition government was also prepared to put Australia's capacity to regulate in the best interests of the Australian community at risk by agreeing to allow large foreign companies to challenge our laws through questionable international tribunals under so-called ISDS provisions. And we saw that occur at significant cost, millions and millions and millions of dollars and years of delay in relation to our plain packaging of tobacco laws. Deputy Speaker, the motion and some of the speakers to the motion oddly call for the urgent ratification of the trade agreement that are under consideration, the Australia-UK agreement, the economic partnership with India. I expect members know, they certainly should know, that those agreements are currently being considered in a proper and timely way by the Joint Standing Committee on Treaties. It's an important matter of parliamentary process and good governance that the J. Scott's inquiry, with its opportunities for submissions and public hearings, including from the National Farmers Federation, all sorts of different sectoral stakeholders, be allowed to occur without undue haste, let alone the presumption that some kind of rubber stamp. It is not. It is not. And those opposite should remember that when the former Coalition government was rushing headlong into an extradition treaty with China, it was the J. Scott, and more specifically Labor's dissenting report, that urged caution. Deputy Speaker, it's also worth taking this opportunity to note that the J. Scott process with respect to trade agreements can and should be strengthened. That was the unanimous conclusion of the committee report tabled in the last Parliament. It made 5 recommendations, including, crucially, by calling for the independent analysis of the economic benefits and impacts of trade agreements and for a sensibly structured means by which key stakeholders, again, primary producers and others, can have better midstream access to the agreement negotiating process. Deputy Speaker, as in many areas of life, trade agreement making is a question not just of quantity, as is referred to in the motion, but quality. We're a trading nation, Australia. We're a trading nation. We're hugely dependent on trade, and our economic, social and environmental well-being will be shaped by how we participate in and influence the global trading system. But we should do so according to the principles of fair, sustainable and free trade, because it's in our national, economic, strategic, environmental and security interest to do so.